Welcome to Pam Jamma's Magical Tales. We post new stories every week, so be sure to subscribe, like, and share to stay updated. If you'd like to support the channel, see sequels, vote on upcoming stories, or even request a custom tale, check out my Patreon. Every bit of support helps bring more magical stories to life. Now, sit back, relax, and enjoy the story. A Place to Be Little. Chapter 1, Arrival in Bergen. Tim adjusted his backpack straps as he stepped off the train, his breath curling in the cool, crisp air. Bergen was everything he expected: grey stone buildings stacked against the mountainside, the scent of the sea drifting in from the harbour, and a slow, steady drizzle misting the cobblestone streets. Norway's second-largest city was beautiful, no doubt, but at the moment, all he could think about was how exhausted he felt. The past 2 weeks in Oslo had been fine. His distant cousin, Odd, had been a great host, a little too great, if Tim was being honest. From the moment Tim arrived at Odd's house, there had been zero alone time. Odd had 2 very energetic kids, and his wife was always finding ways to include Tim in family activities. Breakfasts were loud, outings were long, and every spare moment was filled with something to do. Odd himself was well-meaning but had a way of treating Tim like a Norwegian exchange student rather than a visiting relative. "You need to learn how we do things here, cousin." That was Odd's favorite phrase, usually said while handing Tim a shovel, an axe, or a pick. Tim had spent more time doing outdoor chores and being dragged to landmarks than actually resting. He was glad to see Oslo, really, he was, but now, after 2 weeks of near-constant movement, he just wanted silence. And more than that, he wanted privacy. The last time he'd worn a diaper had been back in the States, weeks before he left. The kids were always around, the house was small, and he didn't dare risk being caught. Every night, he'd lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about it, craving it, but there had been nothing he could do. Now, standing in Bergen's train station, the reality hit him: he was finally free. At least for the next 2 weeks. Tim spotted Sunniva immediately. She was hard to miss, tall, broad-shouldered, and towering over nearly everyone else on the platform. She wore a thick Norwegian wool sweater, jeans, and a weatherproof jacket, her blonde waves bouncing in the wind. Even from a distance, she had a presence. She stood with the effortless confidence of someone who had nothing to prove, arms crossed as she scanned the arriving passengers. And then her sharp blue eyes landed on Tim. A grin broke across her face, and before he could react, she was striding toward him. "There you are, Armatikansk gut," she called, her voice booming over the noise of the station. "Thought maybe you'd gotten lost and ended up in Sweden." Tim barely had time to set his bag down before she pulled him into a hug, a strong, crushing one that lifted him an inch off the ground. "Hey, Sunniva," he wheezed, laughing despite himself. She plopped him back onto his feet, then stepped back to get a good look at him. "You look exhausted, cousin." She tilted her head, amused. "Let me guess, Odd worked you good?" Tim huffed. "You have no idea." "Oh, I have some idea," she said knowingly. "Poor Odd. He tries so hard to be a good host. Never learned that sometimes, people just want to do nothing." Tim blinked. "She got it." "Yeah." He nodded, suddenly more animated. "I mean, I appreciate everything, but I had no time to myself. None. If I wasn't sightseeing, I was helping fix something, or entertaining his kids, or..." Sunniva threw an arm around his shoulders, cutting him off. "Well, don't worry, Tim. You're with me now." She gave his head a playful shake. "No itinerary, no little cousins crawling all over you. Just food, relaxation, and fresh air." Tim relaxed for the first time in days. The rain had picked up by the time they reached Sunniva's car, a sturdy, slightly beat-up Volvo with ski gear piled in the back. "Throw your bag in," she said, unlocking the trunk. "We'll get you settled at my place before dinner." Tim did as she said, sliding into the passenger seat. "So, you work during the day?" he asked as they pulled onto the road. "Yeah," she said casually. "Most days, at least. So you'll have plenty of time to yourself. No chores, no schedules, just you and whatever you want to do." Tim nodded, staring out the window as the city streets blurred into rolling green hills. That sounded perfect. Sunniva's house was modern but unmistakably Norwegian. Tim noticed the differences immediately. The entryway had heated floors, and Sunniva kicked off her shoes immediately. He remembered Odd doing the same. Norwegians never wore shoes inside. The living room was minimalist but cozy, lots of light wood, clean lines, and warm blankets draped over chairs. Tim found all of it oddly charming, small things that reminded him he was definitely not in America anymore. "Make yourself at home," Sunniva said, kicking off her shoes. "There's a guest room upstairs. It's all yours." Tim climbed the stairs, suitcase in hand. The guest room was perfect, cozy but not cluttered, with a big bed and soft lighting. He let out a long breath, closing the door behind him. Finally, a place to breathe. For now, he just let himself enjoy the feeling of privacy. Tim came downstairs a little later, drawn by the smell of something delicious. Sunniva was at the stove, flipping something in a pan, her sleeves rolled up to reveal toned forearms. He took a moment to really look at her. She was beautiful, in a strong, natural, confident way. Even in her casual clothes, there was something about her presence that just pulled people in. Tim shook the thought away. She was his cousin. It wasn't like that. But still, he could admire her, right? "Dinner in 10, she said without turning around. "And no, you're not helping. Just sit there and enjoy the perks of staying with me." Tim smiled to himself. Yeah. This was going to be different. Chapter 2, Dinner and Tempting Thoughts. Dinner was even better than it smelled. Sunniva had made pan-fried salmon with boiled potatoes and a creamy dill sauce, served with thin, crisp flatbread on the side. It was simple but delicious, the kind of meal that made Tim realize how much he had been living off convenience food back home. Sunniva poured herself a glass of wine and stretched back in her chair, watching him eat with amusement. "You must have been starving," she teased, nodding at his plate. Tim swallowed a bite and smirked. "Well, let's just say Odd's wife wasn't exactly a 5-star chef." "Poor guy," she laughed. "Well, don't worry. I'll make sure you don't starve while you're here." Tim smiled, enjoying the warmth of their conversation. Sunniva was so easy to talk to, nothing like the distant relatives who only made awkward small talk. She felt familiar, comfortable. Then, just as he was getting relaxed, she tilted her head and threw him off balance completely. "So, tell me, do you have a girlfriend back home?" Tim nearly choked on his drink. "What's that?" Sunniva grinned. "You heard me." Tim cleared his throat, trying to sound casual. "No, no girlfriend." She blinked in surprise. "Really? No girlfriend? A cute, sweet guy like you?" Tim felt his face heat up. It just hasn't worked out. Which was true, but also not the whole truth. The real reason had nothing to do with his looks, his personality, or even his financial outlook. He knew he was a decent catch, he wasn't model material, but he was kind, smart, stable. Women had liked him before. But every time he tried dating, it always fell apart the moment things got serious. Because deep down, he knew he could never truly be himself with them. How could he explain that? That part of him, the part that wanted to be cared for in a way no girlfriend would ever understand, made relationships impossible. So, instead of saying any of that, he just gave a small, shy shrug. "It just hasn't worked out." Sunniva raised an eyebrow, unconvinced. "That makes no sense," she said, waving a fork in his direction. You're adorable. You're kind. You just finished your master's degree, right? Yeah. See? She leaned back, sipping her wine. Women love that. You should have women lining up for you. Tim chuckled awkwardly. Well, they're not. Their loss, Sunniva said with a shrug. Then she grinned. Don't worry. Maybe I'll find you a nice Norwegian girl while you're here. Tim laughed along with her, but inside, he knew. That wasn't going to happen. Not for him. After dinner, Tim retreated to his room, taking in the space now that he had time to really look around. The Norwegian touches stood out right away. The walls were lined with bookshelves, filled with Norwegian literature and ski trophies. Sunniva had clearly decorated with pride but not clutter. The light switches were smaller and sleeker, nothing like the bulky ones back home. The window had no heavy curtains, just thin, minimalist shades to let the natural light in. It was cozy, warm, and unmistakably Scandinavian. Tim changed into a t-shirt and boxers, sliding under the blankets. But as soon as he lay down, the familiar craving returned. He squeezed a pillow between his legs, imagining for just a moment that it was something else. That it was a diaper. That Sunniva had put it on him. The thought made his whole body go warm. He closed his eyes, letting himself sink into the fantasy. Her voice, her hands, her casual confidence. No big deal, sweetheart. Just relax. Tim shuddered, burying his face in the pillow. God. He wanted it so badly. But tomorrow, he'd finally do something about it. Tim woke up to the smell of coffee and the sound of Sunniva calling up the stairs. Breakfast is ready, sleepyhead. He blinked groggily, momentarily disoriented. Then, it hit him. Today, he would go into town. Today, he would buy diapers. His stomach fluttered at the thought, anticipation buzzing through his limbs. Tim. You coming or what? Sunniva's voice had a teasing edge to it. Tim shook off his thoughts and pulled himself out of bed. One step at a time. Breakfast first. The kitchen smelled like fresh coffee and toasted bread as Tim stepped inside. Sunniva was already seated, sipping from a steaming mug, her hair still tousled from sleep. The table was set with a spread of distinctly Norwegian foods, nothing like the sugar-laden cereal and eggs he was used to back home. Slices of brown cheese. Brunost, which had a caramel-like smell. Crusty bread. Grovbrød, along with butter, jam, and liver pâté. Hard-boiled eggs sliced onto open-faced sandwiches. Pickled herring in a small dish. A bowl of yogurt with honey and muesli. Tim hesitated, eyeing the pickled fish warily. Sunniva smirked. What? Not a fan of a real breakfast? It's different, he admitted, grabbing some bread and butter instead. You mean better, she said, taking another sip of coffee. Americans and their sugary breakfasts. No wonder you're all half asleep by noon. Tim chuckled as he took a bite, but his mind was already elsewhere. His thoughts drifted to the town, the medical supply store, the package he was going to buy. So, Sunniva started, spreading jam onto her toast. Tell me about your time with Odd. What did you guys do? Tim blinked, realizing he hadn't been listening. Huh? She gave him a mock suspicious look. You okay? You look like you're plotting something. Tim's stomach twisted. What? No, just, yeah. Odd. Oslo. It was good. Good. She raised an eyebrow. That's it? Come on, give me details. Tim hesitated, trying to force his brain back into the conversation. Yeah, we saw a bunch of places. The Opera House, Akershus Fortress. You know, all the big tourist spots. And we went to Vigeland Park. That was probably my favorite part. Sunniva raised her eyebrows, pleasantly surprised. Oh yeah? The statues didn't freak you out? No, not at all. It was kind of incredible. I've never seen anything like it. He meant it, too. Vigeland's sculpture park had been mesmerizing, massive stone and bronze figures, some holding babies, others caught in moments of raw, almost exaggerated emotion. There was something about the way they looked, powerful but vulnerable, strange but beautiful. It had stuck with him in a way nothing else in Oslo had. Sunniva smiled, popping a grape into her mouth. Most people think it's just a bunch of naked people doing weird things, but Vigeland was really trying to capture the human experience, all the emotions, all the relationships, from birth to death. Tim nodded. That's what had made it so interesting. It wasn't just art, it was emotion, carved in stone. Glad you liked it, Sunniva said. Most tourists don't get it. Tim felt genuinely pleased at that. But as soon as Sunniva took another sip of coffee, his thoughts drifted right back to his plan. Sunniva finished her coffee and stretched, utterly at ease while Tim tried to suppress his nervous energy. Well, I'm off to work soon, she said, standing and stacking her plate. So, you've got the day to yourself. What's the plan? Tim froze for a split second. Nothing, really. Just gonna relax. Sunniva grinned. Smart man. No chores, no schedule. Just enjoy yourself. Tim nodded, forcing himself to stay casual. But inside, his thoughts were racing. Because as soon as she left, he was going into town. And this time, he wasn't coming back empty-handed. Chapter 3, Into Town. Tim sat on Sunniva's couch, a book open in his lap, eyes flicking back and forth over the same sentence for the 5th time. He wasn't reading. His ears were trained on Sunniva moving around the house, getting ready for work. She was casual about it, sipping coffee, tossing on a raincoat, stuffing things into her bag like she wasn't about to unknowingly grant Tim the freedom he'd been craving for weeks. I'll be back later this afternoon, she said, pulling on her boots. Probably around 5. Try not to get lost or fall into the fjord while I'm gone. Tim glanced up, forcing a smile. I'll try my best. Sunniva smirked, opening the door and letting the cold Bergen air rush in. See you later, Armatikanskgut. And then she was gone. The moment the door clicked shut, Tim exhaled and snapped the book shut. It was time. Tim grabbed his backpack, unzipping it and making space. He pulled out his clothes, stuffing them into the closet. Lighter load, more room. He slung it over his shoulders, checking his reflection in the hallway mirror. His REI rain jacket was zipped up, the water-resistant fabric crinkling as he moved. His hiking boots were already broken in from his time in Oslo. His passport pouch was tucked under his shirt, a habit drilled into him from every travel guide warning about pickpockets in Europe. He looked like exactly what he was, an American backpacker, trekking through Norway, blending in but never fully belonging. That was fine. He didn't need to belong. He just needed to find a place that sold what he was looking for. Sunniva's house was on the outskirts of Bergen, nestled against a hillside where the land rolled down toward the city. The walk was long but the distance didn't bother him. He actually liked it. It gave him time to think. The first stretch of road was quiet, lined with red and yellow wooden houses with steep roofs, built to withstand the heavy Bergen rain. Some had grass-covered rooftops, a strange but beautiful sight. Further down, the houses stacked closer together, and the streets turned to cobblestones, slick from the drizzle. As he neared the city, the streets filled with a mix of locals and tourists. An older couple in thick coats, speaking in Norwegian. A group of backpackers like him, laughing loudly in English. A woman riding her bike effortlessly over the cobblestones, a bag of groceries swinging from the handlebars. The town itself felt old, its buildings leaning slightly, their brick and wooden facades painted in soft, muted colors. But despite its age, Bergen was alive. Tim wandered past Bergen, the historic wharf, where tourists snapped pictures of the colorful wooden buildings lined along the water. He kept his eyes scanning for a medical supply store, but nothing stood out. Without a smartphone to guide him, this was before you could just Google things on the go, he had to do it the old-fashioned way. He walked. He looked. And after nearly 45 minutes, frustration was setting in. He knew what he needed existed. He just had to find it. Eventually, he spotted a woman in her 30s, dressed in a thick wool coat, standing outside a cafe. She looked approachable. Friendly. Tim hesitated, then adjusted his backpack and walked over. "Unschul," he said, clearing his throat. Kan du hjälpa mig?" The woman turned, eyes brightening at his accent. "Ja, sulfulgally." Tim swallowed. Time to commit. "Eho. Vut kan jij huppa? Vauxenblired?" The woman's face lit up with surprise. Her mouth twitched like she was fighting a smile. "Vauxenblired?" she repeated, amusement in her tone. Tim felt his ears burn. "Ja," he muttered. The woman bit her lip, clearly trying to hold back a laugh, but she was kind enough not to make a big deal out of it. "Du kan finna dem på apoteker," she said. "Go ret frem, or du vill say et schilt." Tim nodded quickly, mumbling his thanks before ducking away. His heart pounded. God, that had been humiliating. But at least now, he knew where to go. Tim spotted the sign a few blocks ahead, Apotek 1, the green cross marking it clearly as a pharmacy. His body heated all over. This was it. He swallowed hard, forcing himself forward. Each step felt heavier. He could still turn around. He could just forget about it, go back to Sunniva's, pretend this never happened. If he didn't do this now, when would he? Tim stepped inside. The air was warm, the smell of medicine and lotion filling his nose. His palms were sweating. His face burned. But he was here. And he was going to go through with it. Chapter 4, The Purchase. The bell above the door chimed softly as Tim stepped into the pharmacy. It was smaller than he expected, more like a boutique than the massive drugstores back home. The air smelled like medicated lotion and fresh herbal remedies, and the lighting was soft and natural rather than the harsh fluorescence he was used to. Shelves were stocked neatly and minimally, carrying a mix of prescription medications, supplements, and homeopathic remedies. There were a few racks of hygiene products, but nothing was where he expected it to be. Tim took a cautious step forward, scanning the store. A single customer, an older man with a newspaper tucked under his arm, was browsing near the counter. Tim exhaled, grateful that the store wasn't crowded. But as he wandered past the aisles, he realized he had no idea where to look. This wasn't like American pharmacies, where the adult incontinence products were stacked in an easy-to-find section. His heart pounded as he turned a corner, still not finding what he needed. A voice broke through his thoughts. "Trenger du hjälp?" Tim froze. He turned toward the voice and nearly forgot how to breathe. The woman standing before him was beautiful, mid-40s, effortlessly elegant, with sharp Nordic features and piercing blue eyes. She wore a simple white pharmacy uniform, her blonde hair pulled into a loose bun. There was something about her presence, calm, confident, knowing. "You look a little lost," she said, switching to English with a smile. "Can I help you find something?" Tim couldn't answer right away. His tongue felt thick. His brain screamed at him to just say no and leave. But this was why he had come here. He swallowed, forcing himself to speak. Yeah. I'm looking for." He hesitated, then exhaled. "Diapers." Her expression remained perfectly neutral. "For your child?" Tim's face burned. He glanced at the floor, then back up at her. "No," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "For me." For a second, She just studied him. Then she gave a small, understanding nod, as if this was the most normal thing in the world. "Ah. I see. Come with me." Tim followed her to a low shelf near the back, where she knelt gracefully and plucked a package from the rack. "These should work for you," she said, handing them over. Tim hesitated. "Are you sure these are my size?" The woman arched an eyebrow. Then, before he could react, she opened the package. Tim's stomach dropped. "Wait, you don't have to." Too late. With quick, practiced movements, she pulled out one of the diapers, fluffed it open, and held it up to his waist. "Let's see," she murmured, tilting her head. "Yes, this should fit you well." Tim nearly died on the spot. His entire body felt like it was on fire. The diaper was right there, inches from his stomach, spread out as if she was about to tape it onto him. He couldn't breathe. He should be horrified. He should snatch it away, mumble an excuse, and bolt out of the store. But instead, all he could think was, "This is the closest I've ever been to someone putting one on me." His heart pounded so hard it hurt. She didn't seem to notice. Or if she did, she was kind enough not to let on. "Yes," she said again, folding it back up and slipping it into the bag. "This should be perfect for you." Tim nodded weakly. "Yeah. Okay. I'll take them." Tim shoved cash onto the counter, barely waiting for his change before stuffing the package into his backpack. The woman smiled politely, acting as though nothing unusual had happened. "Ha en fin dag," she said warmly. Tim muttered a quick "tak," before turning and practically sprinting out the door. His mind was spinning. He had done it. He had actually done it. And that woman had just held an open diaper up to him. His stomach flipped as he walked briskly down the street, his backpack now holding exactly what he had been waiting for all these weeks. This was happening. He was finally going to wear one. He could barely contain his excitement. So lost in his thoughts, he didn't notice the figure watching him from the back of the store. Behind the counter, in the storage area where she had been organizing supplies, Sunniva watched. She hadn't been able to hear everything, but she had seen enough. Tim, standing nervously in the aisle. The beautiful pharmacy employee holding a diaper up to his waist. His blushing, frozen reaction. The way he had practically fled the store, flustered but exhilarated. And the irony of it all hit her like a freight train. Of all the places in Bergen. Of all the pharmacies he could have walked into. He had unknowingly chosen the one place where she worked. Sunniva exhaled sharply, shaking her head. Well, little cousin," she murmured under her breath, watching him disappear down the street. Maybe, if he had asked where she worked, he would have picked somewhere else. Maybe, he wouldn't have walked straight into her world. But he had. And now, she understood. Not in a judgmental way. Not in a mocking way. Just understood. And with that, she turned back to her work. Because now, she had a plan. Thanks so much for watching today. We hope you enjoyed this week's story and found it relatable, enjoyable, or just a little comforting. Remember, we post new videos every week, so if you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. If you found this helpful or know someone who might, don't forget to like the video and share it with your community. Your support means everything and helps us keep creating content just for you. And if you'd like to see sequels, vote on upcoming stories, or even get a custom tale made just for you, check out our Patreon. Every bit of support keeps the magic alive. Until next time, take care and stay true to yourself.